Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Join us as we explore Tolkien and all the ages of Middle-earth with your hosts from theonering.com, Jonathan Watson and Michael Grumbine.
You know, when we say we explore Tolkien, we really mean it, because I bet most of you listening today will not have read what Michael and I read in preparation for this week's episode.
You have not read what I have read.
No, you have not. You have to buy the $40 book, The History of the Hobbit, in order to get it, which has and it's like 1,000. How long is the book, Michael? How big? Look, show how thick that is. Look at that. That is tremendous. There's 1,000 pages.
So to answer your question, right? It is nearly 1,000. It is 900.
So we're going
something pages
over. I think we did the 1960 rewrite of chapter 1, which was notes and large sections of rewrite, and then we're going through this chapter 2, which is now not roast mutton. It is the Broken Bridge, and I found this far more interesting than the rewrite of the first chapter.
Likewise.
And so we're getting into that. If you want a copy of it, you can click the link in the show notes below, and you can order it from Amazon. It took us a month to get it, or you can get the Kindle version. I think you can obviously get that like right away. But it's great. It's great. There's so many notes on The Hobbit. The Hobbit is only a couple hundred pages long, but this here is 5 times that when it comes to everything about The Hobbit and how it was done. And so as a reference, like reading through it is a little bit dry, but as a reference, I find it very interesting, which makes it actually on the Kindle maybe a little bit better, because you can easily search for the things that you want to find in it, which in a 1,000-page book is nice. Okay, so we're doing that. Number 2, hey guys, thanks for leaving us a few more reviews. I don't push it enough, and so we don't have that many, even though we get lots of people to listen to the show. So please go to your Apple Podcasts now. We love you more. If you don't, wait, what am I trying to say? We love you more if you do this, right? No, actually, we have no idea who you are, so it doesn't really matter, but we'd appreciate it. In fact, we got this review from someone else took my name. That's what his name was.
There's another
and you will appreciate this one, Michael, because he wrote this week, "This is the best podcast to both escape into fantasy worlds and explore philosophy most applicable for today." Hey, look at that. We're deep too. We're not only like reading something, but we're deep about it. And even better, Michael, he is no longer a freeloader. It's definitely worth the $4 a month. Right. And you might be asking yourself, what is that $4 a month he's talking about? Well, that's because our members get the extended podcast. It's another 15 minutes long at the end of every week. That's a whole nother hour for only $4 that you get. Plus, you get access to our Discord chat, where you can ask questions, where you can interact. I try to get in there relatively regularly. We'll see, but there's lots of great folks, and so we've got questions we're going to answer that were brought up, including what is this pale gold? Why does Tolkien say pale gold? Why does he? What was the other one? Sorry,
enchanted as well. Why is the gold enchanted?
Why is the gold enchanted? Why is the gold pale? And so we're going to kind of look into that, and we've got some notes about it. So
we're also going to. Jonathan doesn't know this because I didn't tell him, but I'm also going to talk about a little bit about the possibility of watching our Tolkien edit, the Hobbit edit, fan edit version of the Hobbit with our Discord folks.
That would be great. Yeah.
I'd love to set up a time and watch it with them, or at least concurrently with them, and do a commentary. That would be fun.
That would be. Yeah, well, let's talk about. We'll set that up a little bit at the end of the show, and we'll talk about it with our members. And if you're special enough, if you'd like to give us $4 a month, go to theonering.com/member, become a member there, or go to theonering.com/Patreon. It's $5 a month there, because Patreon takes.
And if you can't, we still love you. If you're a freeloader, keep listening. We love the engagement, and it's just wonderful to have people who also love Tolkien along with us.
That's right. Oh, and thank you again to Lynn and Rich for being our sponsors. They go above and beyond and do $20 a month, and so we really appreciate them, because that pays the bills and keeps us going. So this week, as we approach our
Hobbit Facts,
you might be wondering, why am I showing a picture of eBay? Well, that's because this Hobbit fact is that if you want a copy of the 1937 or 38 edition of The Hobbit, it's going to cost you a pretty penny these days. This is the American edition, the first American edition of The Hobbit. It is $3,500.
This is the budget version.
This is the budget version. So
because the UK, yeah, go ahead.
Now shipping is only $5.38. However, you might want to upgrade that. So I'm a little concerned with that. But this is like, it comes here with a nice cover with it. It was from a library in Needham, Massachusetts. Okay, this one's $3,500, not too bad. If you're a big fan of The Hobbit, not too bad. All right, so let's go to the next one. Okay, so this one's $4,500. This is the Bowing Elf edition of The Hobbit, so I guess it's more rare. $4,500 if you want your copy that has Gandalf as a little man, not as a wizard. The way he described him. And so this one again, it looks a little more beat up, but it's $1,000 more, perhaps because the Bowing Elf edition is more expensive. It doesn't look like it's from a library, but still has that great map that they wrote. Oh, it says Gift of Jackie Chapman, November 1942. So if you can find Jackie Chapman, maybe you get a special gift or something. I don't know. In any case, so you get all these chapters. You get the entire. Oh, this was a school library. Look at that, right? So the chances that you're going to actually find this like pristine are nil. But if you do find a better edition, you might want to look for the original George Allen and Unwin edition that was printed in 1937. And here, this first edition printing,
save your pennies,
$42,000 for this edition of The Hobbit, sold by Burnside Rare Books. They don't even buyer pays. They don't even list shipping here because they're like, oh, it's free. I guess for $42K. You know,
free economy.
Free shipping is good. Yeah. Ooh. So anyway, this is the original one. It has kind of the Tolkien's rendition of Smaug at the bottom with his mountains at the top. I mean, still, it's not like in great condition, right? It's very used. A lot of marks in it. It came from a library again, right? This is the library card here in the front. Isn't that what it is?
To be fair, we're talking an 85-year-old book, so 86.
I was trying to be fair. I don't think I was being unfair to it.
And unlike books that will be in good condition I have some, as a amateur historian, I have some old books from the 1700s, 1800s. Some of them are in decent condition, actually, compared to this. Difference being, this was meant to be read by the public instead of read
by children over and over again, as we know children will end up doing. So that's why you can see like the binding of the book here is starting to fall apart a little bit. The spine has some rough parts right there. So anyway, so yeah, if you want your copy of the first edition of The Hobbit, printed in 1937,
I'm almost there. I'm saving up.
It's half a Cybertruck.
Half a Cybertruck. That's the unit of measurement we're measuring things in now.
Cybertrucks. How many Cybertrucks does that cost? That's half a Cybertruck for this copy of The Hobbit. Okay, so there you go. That's your Hobbit fact. Save your pennies if you want that. Now, we did last week. I mentioned that Tolkien does a reading of roast mutton in The Hobbit, or of The Hobbit. I don't know. I don't even know when he did it. It's really hard to find information about this. I probably could have spent a lot more time finding it. But what I did do is I was able to pull it off. And you can't actually find this online. It's available through your Kindle device. If you have The Hobbit on Kindle, it's only available on iPhone or iPad. You can't get it on your actual like Mac or PC version of it. So I'm gonna play a short part of this here where Tolkien is reading The Three Trolls. William, Bert, and Ernie. Wait, that's not it.
Not quite.
Wait, who's the third one? William, Bert, and yeah. Great. Okay. See, I know, right? I'm so sorry.
Tom is the third one.
Tom, William, Bert, and Tom. Okay. Oh man, sorry. Yeah, that throws you off when you.
Americans that our youth listening to Sesame Street. So.
We're a little loopy. Okay, so this is Tolkien reading that. I'll do it here. I'm also going to, I think, put up a whole video on YouTube with this here so that it'll be available there for folks. I did run it through improvement software in order to make it sound better, which it's a lot better. But it does drop a couple consonants here and there, but I would recommend this is far better than the version that I was able to pull off the Kindle. The quality is much higher. So here you go. Take a listen for a minute or so, and then look at the link below and find the video on YouTube. Or if you're a Premier member, I will actually attach it just to to the back end of this video, so that, or of this audio file, so that you can listen to that there too.
Mutton yesterday, mutton today, and blimey if it don't look like mutton again tomorrow, said one of the trolls. Never a bit of blinking bit of man flesh we had for long enough, the other said. What the hell William was thinking of to bring us into these parts that all beats me. Other drink running short what's more, he said, jogging the elbow of William, who was taking a pull at his jug. William choked. Shut your mouth, he said as soon as he could. You can't expect folk to stop here forever, just to be ate by you and Bert. You've had a village and a half between you since we came down from the mountains. How much more do you want? And time's beat up our way when you'd have said, thank you, Bill, for a nice bit of fat valley mutton like what this is. He took a big bite off a sheep's leg he was toasting and wiped his lips on his sleeve. Yes, I'm afraid trolls do behave like that, even those with only one head each.
All right, so there you go. There, that's him reading it. It's a little hard to understand, but the original quality wasn't that good either. So it's just, I mean, if you've ever listened to Tolkien speak, he's really hard to understand anyway.
Actually, this is quite good quality in my. As you say, if you listen to the old recordings of Tolkien, he's difficult to understand. He has an interesting accent. He has, of course, the proper British accent, now called the BBC accent, or it's was developed for around the time of radio, and professors were. But then he had his own West Midlands influence thrown in there, and so yeah, it's an older, difficult accent to present. But the quality of that audio is pretty good, actually.
Yeah.
So you got to listen to it. You got to listen to it carefully. It's done. It isn't optimized for YouTube audiences the way everything is nowadays. But
yeah. So if you're Premier member, or it's not Premier member, if you're a member, right, you can listen to this here at the end of the podcast. Just scroll to the end, and so it's about I think it's like 18 minutes long, 17 minutes long, somewhere around there. So that's why this podcast episode is so long if you're a member. So go to thewonder.com/member to get it, or click the link below and it'll be linked to a YouTube video that you can listen to it in.
Nice.
All right, Michael, this is now getting into our episode 7 of The Hobbit. This is called The Broken Bridge, the renamed chapter for roast mutton.
And I think the rename says a lot, right?
It does.
It captures what you and I both think is kind of the essence of one of the biggest shifts between the abandoned rewrite that we're about to go into today, versus what's the now published version. Roast mutton is about food, and roast mutton being a kind of comforting thing, warm, a warm meal, a tasty. It's got that domestic quality that we talked about before. That the Hobbit leans, especially the first couple chapters of the Hobbit, lean into. Versus the Broken Bridge. The Broken Bridge, which is the abandoned version's name for the chapter, as you mentioned, that's all about a geographic feature. And that encapsulates one of the biggest shifts, which is Tolkien has now begun to write about the land itself in a very specific way that is highly reminiscent, to my mind, of the chapters, for example, of travel between Breetown and Rivendell for the hobbits, and then between Rivendell and the Misty Mountains. The geography itself is on full display. Middle-earth has become a place, and it's not just a child's tale where you have the name of the Lonely Mountain as a place, or Rivendell, but what fills in between all the places you start, and these are places too, and Tolkien is putting them on a full display, and a lot of the details of this new chapter have to do with the land.
Yeah, so let me read you guys. I'll read you a paragraph of The Hobbit, the original edition. Well, the 1966 edition, because there are always slight changes in that one. And then I'm going to read you a couple paragraphs from the rewritten edition and show you how much more I think, and listen to not only that the land as a character, I think his prose is more precise and better. I think it's more descriptive, and like you were mentioning, it creates the world around him far more than the Hobbit ever did. So take a listen, and you'll see what we mean. This here is from the Hobbit, the original, not the rewritten version. This is a second or third page. This is as they as he's talking about them going through the Hobbit land. So he writes this. At first, they had passed through Hobbit lands, a wide, respectable country inhabited by decent folk with good roads, an inn or two, and now and then a dwarf or a farmer ambling by on business. Then they came to lands where people spoke strangely and sang songs Bilbo had never heard. Now they had gone on far into the lone lands, where there were no people left, no inns, and the roads grew steadily worse. Not far ahead were dreary hills, rising higher and higher, dark with trees. On some of them were old castles with an evil look, as if they had been built by wicked people. Everything seemed gloomy, for the weather that day had taken a nasty turn. Mostly it had been as good as May can be, but even in merry tales, but now it was cold and wet in the lone lands. They had been obliged to camp when they could, but at least it had been dry. One short chapter about where they're going and then how it becomes wet. And then here's the rewritten version, essentially removing that and adding this. And I'm actually cutting out a little bit more in the one chapter in the intro here. But beyond the bridge, the road was still good, and there were wide lands looking wholesome enough. They met or came up with a number of folks on lawful business, dwarves for the most part, going east or west with packs on their backs. Some belonged to Thorn's people of the western mountains, and they saluted him with a low bow. Some were of a poor sort, peddlers of ironware, tinkers, or road menders. There were few men, farmers mostly, ambling along on large, fat horses and several hobbits on foot. They stared at Thorn's company, but gave them no more than a grin and a nod. In a day or two, they came to Bree on the hill. There they spent their last comfortable night, for many a day to come, in the great inn of Bree, the prancing pony, well known to the hobbits of the east side of the Shire. Bree was as far as Bilbo's knowledge reached, even by hearsay. Beyond it, the lands had been desolate for many long years. When in a day's journey more, they came to the last inn, they found it deserted. They camped in its ruins, and next day they passed into a barren country with great marshes on their left, as far as I could see. They went very slowly now, sparing their laden ponies and often trudging on foot, for the road became very bad, rutted and pitted in places, almost lost in a soft bog. The weather remained dry. As far as Bree, it had been as fair as May can be, even in legends, but now it was rather gray and sad. So much more. 2 long paragraphs, longer than that one paragraph right there, to describe the world. We get the prancing pony. We get meeting up with many dwarves who are bowing to Thorin. We see hobbits and men, farmers ambling along on large, fat horses, I think he says. Yeah, fat horses. We get the fact that Bree has heard of that Bilbo has heard of the prancing pony and nothing beyond it. So the world, like you said, is becoming a character now. There's so much more to it. And I think his prose, when they're in wide lands that are looking wholesome enough, like this line, they camped in its ruins. The next day they passed in a barren country with great marshes as far as they could see. And he talks about the very bad road being rutted and pitted and places almost lost in soft bogs. So the description in short, concise terms that bring up the world to you are, I think, far greater than they were in The Hobbit. This was an example of that to me.
And not only is the description agreed, and not only is the description better, but it's bringing up certain elements that are important. Obviously, it does things like, puts Breetown on the map and things like that. But it also brings up some interesting elements of Tolkien's story, which are going to be reinforced by further additional dialogue, such as lawful business, like business that has to do with the law. Mm-hmm. So there's a law then, if in order for there to be lawful business, which also implies lawlessness. In the paragraph beyond which you read, because you read a sample paragraph.
Yeah.
And actually, there's 2 more paragraphs more about their travels in the land before they get to the part about the referencing of the kettle singing, which, in an unusual spin on Tolkien's nature, this chapter remains the only chapter that doesn't have singing in it, except a kettle. So the kettle things, I'm going to claim that as a halfway win, because my claim has always been Tolkien can't go a chapter without somebody singing. In this case, it's just the kettle, and the kettle sings in both versions, both the published one that we know of as well as the abandoned version. But it says in the next paragraph after you had stopped, it describes the land as it says they went on for many days, and each day they became more silent and wary, for there was a stillness all around them, as if the land was listening. So Bilbo thought to himself. After a time, the flatlands began to rise before them. Still far away were hills looming up, and as they drew nearer, Bilbo saw they were clad in dark trees, and on some there seemed to be the ruins of grim towers and walls. They had an evil look, as if men of evil days had built them. So you have that reference to the evil ruins, just like you do in the published version, but it's much more built up. It's much more, there's much more detail. The land itself begins to watch them. So there's a sense not only of the land being more detailed, but more dangerous. So you have, and that's going to continue to be emphasized as they go on.
And I think the danger is the central part of this chapter. It's almost like it's no longer the trolls in a way, right? It's the broken bridge, which is the name of the chapter. Right. So they get to the bridge and they get there, and Gandalf says, "Ha!" said Gandalf, peering through the rain. The bridge is broken. He turned away, snapping his fingers and muttering to himself, "There's mischief here. Elrond must be told." So right away, we don't come upon the trolls, and the trolls are the big problem in this chapter. It starts with the bridge. He cues us into the danger that's even further to come, right? So there's far more, and the world is at danger now because he has to go tell Elrond. So like you said, the world is bigger. There's more description to it. There's more importance to the things that happen in it. It's not just dwarves and a hobbit on a journey. There's a greater world around them.
Right. They're not just wandering through these wildlands even. There's a sense of law that we referenced the lawful business. Gandalf, as you just read, Gandalf references having to tell Elrond. Why would he have to tell Elrond rules over Rivendell? But it turns out Elrond has a kind of domain that he's responsible for. And that domain apparently includes the last bridge, or what's now the broken bridge. And so there's a real sense of just putting in place the idea of kingdoms. Later on, there's a reference to, Bilbo's shocked that the people around here haven't heard of the king. And the dwarves respond to that. Right. Obviously, this is Tolkien setting up the whole idea of the king being, this ancient idea of the king of Arnor in this case. And so, he's bringing Middle Earth here, and he's doing so. He's not just bringing Middle Earth; he's bringing time as well. He's very specific about chronology now. He talks about how many days it is between Hobbiton or the Shire rather, and Bree. So they've been going for a couple of days, he says, and he talks about the amount of time it takes and what day it is. Like Bilbo loses track and thinks that this is terrible weather for June, and Tolkien says, "Poor Hobbit, he was quite out of his reckoning. It was the 19th of May, but the 3 weeks on the road began to seem endless." So he's sort of diminishing Bilbo. So Bilbo's kind of losing it. He's losing his grip on his own reckoning, which is a part of the what's going to become the character arc of Bilbo, which Tolkien seems much more to bring into detail and focus. But also, he's being specific. It's the 19th of May that this takes place on. And so we have a lot of specificity, geographic specificity, chronological specificity, and it has the feeling of making a more real world. It's the kind of thing, when we were reviewing Rings of Power, for example, we were criticizing them because they couldn't even get basic chronology right with regard to their own story about when the Númenóreans came over and the amount of time it takes to travel different places. Like, they couldn't make it real. Tolkien, what you see here is the effort of an actual artist in a secondary world, where some people may think, oh, this is kind of pedantic. Who cares what day of the month it is? We are creatures of time and space. We exist in time and space. So when you're space being geography and time being the chronology, when you're specific about that and you make a world that makes sense with it, with a normative sense of time and a normative space, a space that people can relate to or at least picture, that makes it a much more real world and grittier and more dangerous too in this case, because there's a lot of efforts about it. So, for example, entirely missing from the published version that everyone's familiar with is the crossing of the bridge. I think there's one line, let's see if I can find it, about the crossing of the bridge. Fortunately, the road went over an ancient stone bridge, for the river, swollen with rains, came rushing down from the hills and mountains of the north. It was nearly night when they had crossed over. And that's it. So they reached an ancient stone bridge, and then it was nearly night when they crossed over. That is in tremendous contrast to the abandoned version, the newer version, or would have been a newer version, and where we go on for a tremendous amount of time talking about how difficult the crossing is. First of all, the bridge has been broken, and we learn later in this abandoned version that it was the trolls that broke it. They even talk about it. They mention it to each other. But second of all, it's a whole page and a half of dialogue talking about getting through this bridge, getting over. Sorry, not the bridge. Getting over the river without the bridge, and this is the only place they can do it, and it's very dangerous. And that brings me to another major change, sad, which is Rohald.
A loss
about Rohald.
Rohald is the proto Shadowfax.
That's right.
Gandalf has a horse, and they give him a name, and his name is Rohald. And he's not just any horse, just like Shadowfax was not any horse. But clearly, this horse isn't just. But he is Gandalf's horse, and he has a role to play. And so we see him here, right? So let me read what's happening here with the river a little bit, so that you understand what's going on. So they have trouble. The river is fast. They have to cross the river. Gandalf says, or Tolkien writes, it was swift at the point where the bridge had been built. It flowed over a rocky shelf and then slid down long rapids to their right. Here it foamed and swirled around the broken stones of the arch that were tumbled in the midst of its cold gray stream.
So the wizard, Gandalf proves that it can be done. He says, with that, he mounted his horse and rode forward. As Bilbo had already noticed, Gandalf used no stirrups and seldom he held the reins. This is, like you say, this is a foreshadowing, pun intended, I guess, in this case, of Shadowfax. Gandalf rides Shadowfax without reins and just speaks to him. Seldom held the reins. Rohald answered his commands, spoken softly in a strange tongue. So Gandalf speaks to Rohald in his own tongue. The white horse tried the water and then walked on, slowly but without fear. The ponies lifted their dejected heads and watched him, like hobbit children staring at some large lad showing off for their benefit. He skirted the tumbled bridge stones in midstream where the water was up to his hocks and waded carefully to the further side. There he slipped and recovered, for the far bank was steeper and more slimy. At last he scrambled up, turned back, and neighed. And this isn't the only time he's going to neigh at them. Once he gets them across, he also neighs. But Rohald essentially becomes the Gandalf of the equine Gandalf to the ponies. So the ponies have a rough time in this one. They bolt, they run off, they won't go a certain direction where it turns out the trolls are. And each time Rohald is there, shows them it can be done. It's cool to me that he emphasizes not that the dwarves watched Rohald, which of course they were watching him, but the ponies lifted their dejected heads and watched Rohald. So here we have Gandalf is known for inspiration. I mean, Tolkien's going to lean heavily into this when he eventually, in his text, gives Gandalf Narya, the Ring of Fire and Hope, inspiring, and he's the figure. That's what he does. His purpose is to inspire hope. Rohald fulfills that purpose with the ponies and leads them, shows them the river can be crossed. And then once they're across and won't go any closer to where it turns out trolls are, although nobody knows it at that point, he neighs to them and calls them up a bank and onward, and they follow him. So Rohald is the equine Gandalf, proto Shadowfax, but whatever. He's a cool character, and we lose him entirely. And he's probably the biggest miss, the thing that I miss the most, having read now this new version versus the old, versus the published version.
Tolkien was far more effective in creating characters in this version. You can tell he's had 20 years of work doing this. And good point. And so I feel like it's funny because I was not a huge fan of the loss of charm in the first chapter in the rewrite, but I find myself hewing far closer to the idea that I would be open to this whole change here. I think it makes the world more interesting. And like I said, my favorite character in Tolkien stories is Middle-earth, is the world that he created. And so to see it created this way really makes me love it more. What's funny, though, I thought about Rohald, is though he inspired the ponies and everyone got across, we talked a little bit about how Bilbo had been diminished in this chapter, or he's diminishing him so he has a greater character arc in this rewrite. It's not enough for Bilbo to go across. And not only is it not enough for Bilbo, they'd forgotten about Bilbo. I thought that was funny that they actually wrote, they had quite forgotten. Gandalf says to them, "Don't you want the Hobbit anymore? I think you may need him." You're like, oh, yeah. They'd quite forgotten Bilbo. He was on the other side, sitting and shivering, more frightened than he had yet been in his life. And then Thorn says to him, "Confound your Hobbit. When will he learn to look after himself?" So Bilbo is like, he is really straggling. He's not just far behind on a pony on some trail. He's incapable of going across on his own where everybody else did it just fine. He's still sitting there shivering and Thorin doesn't like him, and Gandalf is still the encourager behind him. And so it creates this sort of like, he really is just this hanger-on. He's just he's being pulled by the sheer force of not being want to be left alone. That's the only reason he's there with them.
Right. And I really like, and Gandalf, it's interesting in that situation, right? Because it tells us Thorin's mindset, which is he doesn't care about Bilbo at all.
Yeah. Right.
And he says, confound your Hobbit. I mean,
yes.
Have we forgotten that Thorin signed a contract with him that, from the previous chapter, or actually the beginning of this chapter? And so he's automatically like, he's Gandalf's Hobbit to Thorin's mind. So Thorin is a lot harsher in our depiction here in the new version of the Hobbit. And Gandalf is a lot more encouraging. And he actually goes back. But what's interesting is he points out Bilbo actually has the smallest pony, and it was dangerous for the other ponies to cross. So he literally, Gandalf has to go back to the stream, and he says, hold on to your pony's reins, he said, and keep him on our right if you can. He can make it with Rohald to break the force of the current. Steady now, he said to the horse. Once more over, and your own land is not so far ahead. So they make it over that way, but it's really interesting that Gandalf is being shown here. And I would argue there's a couple other points in this chapter, well, at least one of which we'll talk about a little later on, where he is shown as he is the force bringing maturity to Bilbo, raising Bilbo's stature, and in the dwarves' eyes and in others, and defending him and supporting Bilbo. He knows Bilbo has growth that's needed. Bilbo isn't ready for this adventure, and Gandalf has determined that he's going to help Bilbo get there. And so he does in a variety of ways.
Yeah, and that's right. That's Gandalf's role. He's there to encourage and build up, and we have this very real example of that. I was thinking about this, like, since we both really love this idea that Gandalf has a horse named Rohald, and I wonder if reading this, one of the things Tolkien was thinking was, he's like, all right, we've got this horse Rohald. Shoot, where did he go between this and the Lord of the Rings? Now I have to come up with the reason for that. Do I have to start rewriting Lord of the Rings a little bit? Do I have to do it? And so he was probably thinking, like, how much more work am I going to have to do if I actually go through with this rewrite of the Hobbit?
Rohald becomes scared. What happens, like, when Shadowfax shows up? He's the Rohald. Rohald's the 1988 Civic that you used to drive, and it was good back then. But sorry,
is Rohald one of the Miras? Right? Is he from the line of Shadowfax? Does he come from? Like, it seems that way.
Seems that way. Like the way he's being ridden, the way he's being talked to, the way he inspires other horses. He's like a leader among horses. Very reminiscent of the Miras.
Yeah.
So yep. But
okay. Well, let's get. Yeah. Sad we lost him. Let's get to the trolls, because the trolls are, for the most part, the same, right? Not a ton has changed. He didn't add a bunch of stuff. The one thing I will say, and what we can talk about this sort of as an idea as we look at the trolls that he made, that he makes them whereas Bilbo is more helpless and forgotten, the dwarves are a little more crotchety, the trolls are a little more dangerous. And like you said earlier, the trolls are the ones that destroyed the bridge, and so that the reason Bert and Tom, sorry, I'll say it. Bert and Tom are angry with William is that he pulled down the bridge. And so their argument isn't just about, like, not having food. They're not on the same page. So they're fighting a little bit. And I thought that added so much more character to them. And like, there's a reason for them being angry now. And the idea that there's an identification with the three people trying to get along. I found that so much more enjoyable as coming from the idea that you have to create a story around these trolls rather than a Billy Goat's Gruff, they're under a bridge type of thing, and
right,
they don't really do a whole lot other than that. No, they play a part in the world now, and these trolls are dangerous. And I thought the whole setup to the dwarves also, I don't know if you noticed this here, trolls, is far more involved. So let me read this line that he wrote as they were approaching this area. The wind rose, seething in the trees. Rain drove in their faces, and the light began to fade. Far behind, there was a brief stab of red as the sun sank westwards. Shadow loomed before them. Still they went on, and last in line came Bilbo. So he's already setting up, it's a dangerous world, right? I love the idea of wind seething in the trees. Rain was driving in their faces. There was a stab of red. It wasn't like a glorious ray of sunlight. It was a stab of red. And the shadows were looming in front of them. So right away we get the far more descriptive terms in the world. The prose I find is far more effective right here, and that struck me as a wonderful place where we did that. And not only now do they come upon trolls, they see a little light in the distance on a hill that they have to get to. And so even that little thing of the world is far bigger because you have to go to this hill to go up the hill, and then you have to follow this light that you're seeing was just the smallest example of where he's creating the world to be a bigger place. I don't know. What did you notice anything about that as they approach the trolls?
Yes, well, I 100% agree with you. I think, and to go back to an earlier thing you said, Tolkien's prose is highly developed here with regard to his descriptiveness of the land. It's superior, frankly, to his own style from decades before, and so I love that. I like how there's also more character development in the pre-trolls scene. Oin and Gloin even start fighting each other with the wet branches that won't light, which is funny. Yes. And then there's a big debate, which doesn't occur in the published edition, about whether they should go in specifics. Like Gloin is suspicious of the fire and says he could think of many things that were much worse than what they were facing now. You get on with your fire then, said the others. Balin was the most doubtful. These are strange parts and not canny, he said. They are too near the great mountains, if I reckon right. This is no man's kingdom, without charts or guards or watchmen. Which, by the way, no man's is capitalized as a single word, which is a hilarious joke from classics. So since no man is the name that Odysseus gives to himself when he blinds the Cyclops demands to know who has blinded him, and Odysseus says, "I'm no man," and as a name, and so the Cyclops calls out to his fellows that he's been blinded by no man, and they mock him like, "If you've been blinded by no man, then what are you complaining about?" So this is a classics joke. This is no man's land, without charts or guards or watchmen. And then that's when Bilbo speaks up and says, "Do you mean they haven't heard of the king here?" asked Bilbo with a sinking of the heart. For in the Shire, they said that only of wild and wicked things. So it's there's a lot more detail here, which tells us more about this land and its history, sort of slide into chaos that's happened, along with a little more character development with characters like Oin and Gloin and Balin.
Yeah, the line about the king struck me as interesting because before it was something Tolkien said to the reader as sort of like breaking the third wall, right? Where he writes, others said these parts are none too well known and are too near the mountains. Travelers seldom they come this way. They have seldom even heard of the king around here, and less inquisitive as you. Right, so the king that's part of a way that he speaks to the reader, and that's one thing that's completely gotten rid of here. There is no more childish speak. We talked about last week about how he regrets making this a child's book, which we had a couple people on YouTube be like, no, it's great. I'm so glad he didn't make the change to it, but he regretted it. And so he gets rid of that whole idea that he's speaking to them and saying, others said this and they said that. And do you know that this here happened? Right. Or the line that, yes, I'm afraid trolls do behave like that, even those with only one head each. He gets rid of that completely. And so he gives Frodo, man, I do this all the time. He gives Bilbo the line. And I love it how that integrates it into the story. So it's something that Bilbo knows. We're not just told it's something that people around that area knew, and it's far more effective.
Right. It's not the narrator speaking to the audience. Yeah. It's Bilbo speaking to the dwarves, and so it's you're much more in the world instead of having this sort of flyover view, child's view. I agree with that. And but eventually they do send Bilbo off. There are a lot more specificity with regard to animals, because instead of the hooting like an owl, they tell him to cry like a nighthawk and 2 hoots like an owl. And Bilbo says he does never heard a nighthawk, but he wishes he could fly like a bat. So we got all kinds of animals coming in here that Tolkien's just having fun with. So anyway, there's a lot more sort of specific detail, which I found cool. And it makes it more real in that regard. But the trolls themselves, to go to them, as you had mentioned, they're more dangerous. Mm-hmm. They're more dangerous because first they can knock down a stone bridge, which is a big deal. They're not just bumbling around, but they make plans about it. They knock the bridge down so they could eat more people, which shows a level of malice and And it says, so William, instead of just saying you've had a village and a half, he says you've had a village and a half since we came down from the mountains, and folks have all skedaddled. So he mentions what's happened, like, you ate that many and people left, and then said, and that tells us as the reader that's why they knocked the bridge down. They're trying to sort of hem people in.
Yeah.
Which is a lot more malicious.
And I mentioned he got rid of that line about, yes, I'm afraid trolls behave like that, even those with only one head each. He says that right after he wipes his mouth on his sleeve, which he does here in the rewrite as well. But instead of even mentioning that I'm afraid trolls behave like that, he says, that is the way of trolls of their sort. Great, greedy, slow-witted brutes. There are other kinds, more cunning and dangerous. But Tom and Bert and Bill were quite dangerous enough. So he doesn't just... He says outright they're dangerous, right? We have to believe that they're dangerous. And we learned that because, right, they ate a village and a half, and of course he wipes his mouth on his sleeve. They're like that. They're bad-mannered man killers, as opposed to good-mannered man killers, which we can put up with far more easily.
But he is foreshadowing things like the Olaghai of Mordor and stuff, who are trolls of a different type. They're war trolls, and we're gonna learn about much later in the Lord of the Rings.
Okay, so this is kind of the end now of the full written portion. There are a few notes that they put in. I think one of the most interesting ones is that Tolkien says instead of William losing a tooth, he loses a fang. Right. Just a small little change, but makes him more dangerous. And then we get into a short section about after in the plunder of the Trolls cave. And I think you had an interesting point, right? So Sting gets a whole paragraph now essentially dedicated to it, rather than just a small one line about it's a good sword. Gandalf says this about the swords. Gandalf took one, or Tolkien writes this, Gandalf took one and presented the other to Thorin. To Bilbo he gave a knife with a silver pommel. A gift for a good hobbit, he said with a bow, which pleased Bilbo very much, though he did not himself feel that he had earned any praise. He looked at the knife. It had a sheath of black figured leather, and when he drew it, he saw the blade was bright and unstained. It was long enough to serve a hobbit as a sword. They look like good blades too, said the wizard, half drawing the swords and examining them closely. So yeah, go ahead.
Right. So my observation about this is just, it's interesting because in the original version, here's the original version about what we will later, the knife that will later be named Sting by Bilbo. Gandalf and Thorin each took one of these. Oh, I'm sorry. This is after two of their swords with their jeweled scabbards caught their eye. Gandalf and Thorin each took one of these. And Bilbo took a knife in a leather sheath. It would have made only a tiny pocket knife for a troll, but it was as good as a short sword for the
That's it. That's it.
Bilbo just finds a random knife and picks it up. In this version that you just read, Gandalf takes it and he presents it to Bilbo, and he does it with accolades. He says a gift for a good hobbit. So he's calling him good, building him up, encouraging him, and he does it with a bow. And so here you have Gandalf is in the place of the leader. In the medieval trope, the giving of a blade to someone who has deserved it and has shown worth, which Gandalf has told the dwarves that Bilbo did as good as could be expected in that troll encounter, and they wouldn't have done better without him. Sorry. So Gandalf is giving him a gift in recognition of what he's done, essentially. And so I can't help but think of the Lord giving a blade, a sword, to a knight or to someone, and it's a good blade, and it's done for usually in the medieval trope, of course, the knight then serves the Lord. Gandalf is here building Bilbo up. This is that process that I talked about briefly recently, where it's like the crossing of the ford. Bilbo needs to grow. He needs to even reach the level the dwarves are at. The dwarves aren't at Gandalf's level, but he needs to be matured in the art of adventuring and being a person that can be relied on. And I think this is part of that growth process. And also, of course, it's giving Sting much more airtime, because it becomes a famous blade later on. So we get to learn a little bit about it in the beginning.
Yeah. It's also easy.
Go ahead.
I was going to say it's easy for Tolkien in a way to look at this and start going through all the edits he wanted to make and see it growing and growing and growing. He's like, oh, I have to talk more about Sting now. I have to talk more about Elrond now. And so I see that even in this small part of where he has to bring up the importance of these swords now, that there is more to them than simply a large knife that Bilbo picked up. And so
he adds one more detail in the treasure, or actually two I might want to talk about, but this one about the blades, and this is about Glamdring and Orcrist, which I found fascinating. And I wondered what your take on it was, because I think it gives us a clue as to what happened with the previous owners, but I guess opinions can differ. And that is, he says, these were not made by any troll, this is Gandalf examining Glamdring and Orcrist, nor by any smith among men of these days, but there's black blood on them, goblin blood. When they are cleaned and the runes on them can be read, we shall know more about them. In the original version, he just says, when we can read the runes on them, we'll know more about them. He doesn't say anything about the goblin blood or the need to be cleaned. In my mind, what that implies is, what's the black goblin blood? The owners of, I mean, it's obviously the blood of goblins, but under what circumstances would an owner of this kind of blade use it to kill goblins and then put it back in the sheath without cleaning it?
Yeah.
Only if they were themselves probably killed by the goblins or by trolls with goblins, which, I mean, is black goblin blood the same as black troll blood? I mean, is this all of a kind? Did these owners wound the trolls and then the trolls overcame them and now have their weapons? Or did they come upon them, the bodies of them? But there's pretty much no circumstance under which a person that would wield Glamdring and Orcrist would put their blade back in the sheath covered in blood, at least not permanently, temporarily only, but they would have cleaned them. So clearly, I think the previous owners or carriers of these blades were slain in the same act that their goblin blood came upon them. But I don't know what Tolkien's meaning to imply here. So what do you think?
Here's if I were writing this here as a story or as a film and saying, okay, we got to really give these places an origin, I would say that it wasn't that Glamdring and Orcrist were stolen from some human they'd eaten or some farmer who had it stuck in his barn. No, I think they probably were. They're in a cave. And so they're in places where people would be buried and dug up, or perhaps there was a battle and they died with these swords underneath them. And so those swords were left and covered and who knows. So I think they simply probably found them. And since they like to hoard things, they would hoard something that they could use as a weapon. Or they were essentially grave robbers and they would go in and they would find things like that too.
Or they ate the goblins that beat the men, that ambushed the men who, in other words, these are trolls. They'll eat anything.
Yeah, but aren't goblins and orcs interchangeable, right? Isn't that what Tolkien ultimately said?
Yes, but why wouldn't trolls eat orcs if they wanted to, or goblins? I mean, the goblins of the Misty Mountains is what we're about to encounter in this
That's
story.
True.
Anyway, so I mean,
do they like orc flesh better than dwarf flesh?
Oh, I don't think they like it better. I just think that they in tough times you eat. I mean, these are trolls; they'll probably eat anything.
Yeah, you're right. I would say okay. So they would. So the idea. So I'm thinking of this in a side quest that you have in figuring out where the trolls got their sword is that they come up on a small group of trolls, or they are just okay. So we're going forward here in the Hobbit, just like Bilbo and the dwarves are taken by surprise by the goblins from the Misty Mountains. Perhaps these trolls are waiting for the goblins, and they end up taking them instead, thinking that the goblins are going to take the trolls, and so they kill all the trolls, and then they follow them or something
believable.
Like that.
It's a great thing. Yeah. Like Tolkien puts in this part of a sentence, fragment of a sentence, which unlocks the imagination. Now there's all kinds of possibilities. Why is the blood here? Because this is not the normal state of. So who are the previous owners? Of course, these are weapons of the highest quality because nobody nowadays can make anything like them, etc. I mean, it's this great little Tolkien unlocking. He probably didn't even know the full. I mean, at this point when he's doing the rewrite, he does because he knows what Glamdring and Orcrist are. They're from Gondolin, and he's already written
right.
part.
And so I was trying to think, like, are these? That's why I was like, okay, it's a grave robber type of an idea because they'd like these. Are these blades left and found later, or if they were passed down through the ages, from whom to whom, or were they the same orcs, or they were just kept in an orc horde for the thousands of years that after the fall of
and I'm going to angle towards orc horde in that regard, though, because if they're in a grave, the people that buried the warriors that had them wouldn't have left goblin blood on the blades when they buried them. So it's the goblin blood that's the problem here in that regard. Anyway, the end of this chapter is pretty funny too, because again feeds into the Gandalf pumping up Frodo, I did it too. Pumping up Bilbo.
Wait, real fast. Wait, wasn't one of the sorry, I'm thinking about the swords. So wasn't one of the swords given a different name by the orcs?
Yes. Yes.
Let me look it up. Hold on.
And this is in the hall. It's in the Goblin King. They recognize the blades, don't they?
Right. Yes, they do. So that would give okay. So see, I talked myself into agreeing with you again. Dang it. But yeah. They called it beater.
Yeah.
What was the other one?
They have their own names, and Biter. I think.
Yeah. So they knew these swords, right? These swords that's probably why they were in a horde and they didn't want to use them, because they don't like the swords, but they can't give them away because they don't want anybody to fight them with it. So yeah.
It is interesting that they would keep them,
and
give them names and not use them. And like it's an interesting, even the goblin kind of Middle Earth can't help but be somewhat impressed by the Gondolin blades. Why wouldn't they just have broken them and thrown them in a ravine somewhere?
Yeah, right.
In a deep hole. So anyway, at the end of this newly written chapter, Thorin is still trying to get information out of Gandalf, just like the chapter that we're aware of. Like, where'd you go off to, and why'd you come back? And Gandalf gives us a bit more information. He references that he met the Rangers, so that's new. And there's no, and he also mentions they don't have any food. So this is the part I like. He says, "The rest you can guess, but please be more careful. We should never get anywhere. My friends," these are the Rangers / elves that he met along the way, "had no food to spare, for they are hunting. There are other wicked things abroad." Now that's interesting too. So what other wicked things are there besides these trolls? "The troll's larder is a piece of luck that you hardly deserve." So here he is criticizing Thorin. "But for Mr. Baggins, you might have been lying among the bones on the floor. Pray don't mention it," said Thorin. And that's the end of the chapter. So chapter ends with him criticizing the dwarves and praising Bilbo. And Thorin's like, "Don't talk about that."
Yeah. Right. He says, "Pray don't mention it here." In the original, he says, "Thank you."
Well, please be more careful. He's not responding to the criticism, because in the original there's no criticism of you didn't even deserve the food from the trolls. Gandalf here is saying the troll's larder is a piece of luck you hardly deserve. So and then talks about Mr. Baggins. I don't think that's in the published version at all, about you'd be dead if it weren't for him.
Yeah. And I'm sure that that gets Thorin in here in the way he's recreating him in the wrong way. Thorin does not like to be told at all.
Nope.
It's not, "Pray don't mention it" is not like a throwaway line. It's like, no, really, don't mention
it. No, really, don't talk about it. And he is definitely more of a dwarf lord, because at the passage you read, they pass dwarves, and the ones that are from Thorin's kingdom in the west they bow to him. They show him the courtesy of a lord, of a vassal to a lord, as they're passing on the road. So Thorin's definitely more of in that sense, the Hobbit movie version of Thorin is more accurate to what Tolkien had in mind. More of a lordly, regal character. So anyway, all in all, it's fascinating to read this version. Like you said, I really liked the changes in this chapter, especially Rohald. Man, I wish Rohald had made it into the final version of The Hobbit. That's too bad. Oh, Bomber, didn't mention him. Bomber sleeps through the whole troll episode.
Oh, that's
others.
right. Oh,
and
yes.
and the ponies run off. So in this new version, Bomber just slips his way, which is like a foreshadowing of Bomber always falling asleep. Like he falls asleep in Mirkwood. This is what Bomber does. He falls asleep and the ponies are gone.
Yeah, and doesn't Rohald go get the ponies too?
Does he? I can't remember.
Or is it?
It said that they're happy that Gandalf is okay. Gandalf's is cheerful anyway because they got the food from the troll cave. Also, another funny thing was some of the baggage from one pony was lost in the river back before the trolls. And Tolkien says the last they heard of their best cooking pot was donk donk as it went down the river, which was
love that.
It's great onomatopoetic prose. But
okay,
go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say we have to decide: do we like it better or worse than the chapter? We have to get there. Unless you had one more thing to add.
No. I just wanted to mention
this is longer than we're doing the whole chapter rather than half of this. We probably could cut this in half and been just as good. All right. So my takeaway from the first chapter was that his prose removed a lot of the joy, to quote a certain presidential candidate, from the chapter. It's not as charming anymore, right? The whole good morning wordplay is gone, and that is a loss. And I think Tolkien kind of got in his own head about, I can't be this playful in my language. I need to be a little more stately. That lost the charm in it. However, in this chapter, I feel like we are in the meat and in the danger, and the characters have been set already. And I think there is some wordplay he left. When he asked where did he go, he said to look ahead, and what brought you back, looking behind. He kept that in. He doesn't remove that. And so as a whole, if he would have written this chapter this way, I would have been, I enjoy it actually far more than the original one, like on a very, very, very high level. I think the characters are more well written. I think the world is more painted. We see it far more in our mind's eye than we do otherwise. It is the fairy story is becoming much more real, whereas before it's a tale. Now it's becoming a real story. And so I would say, whereas the first time I think you lose the charm in that first chapter, in this one you gain the world. That sounds like a bit lose the charm but gain the world.
I like it.
You gain Middle Earth. So that was my takeaway. I really enjoyed it. I wish he would have rewritten this chapter.
That should be our tagline.
Lose chapter, gain the world.
Lose the charm, gain the world.
Lose the charm. Sorry. Yeah. What was your takeaway?
I very much agree. I have a slight addendum to that, which I think the reason I like keeping the charm in the first chapter is because of the geography. So the geography of the first chapter is the Shire. And the Shire is a charming place. It is a domestic place. It is a place with the comforts that draw us in and attract us. And in fact, that Bilbo is always thinking about throughout the rest of the book, returning to. And so to lose charm in the Shire is a loss. To lose some charm, but not, they don't even lose much in the wilds, in the lone lands. Although, funnily enough, in the rewrite, he took out the words lone lands. There's no lone lands. It just describes other places. It's funny. I was looking through that. It's like, they actually doesn't use the word lone lands here. But to lose a little bit of charm there and gain the danger of the wilds and the grit and the reality of what the danger means in a wild place like this is a big 2 thumbs up from my. And then you add in the character development with the dwarves and Gandalf's leadership of Bilbo, maturing Bilbo, and you add in the character development with Rohald, the horse, and all of there's a lot more pony action, with ponies getting lost and running and following and all this other stuff. It's just a better written. I think this is a better written chapter.
Yeah.
And he also keeps the charm of the trolls' dialogue, like their funny dialogue.
It's true. Yeah, we spent almost no time talking about that because it's barely changed at all. And like you said, the biggest difference is Bomber sleeps through it all, loses the ponies. And I just since we love Rohald so much, if I play Red Dead Redemption 2 again, I will name my horse Rohald next time. Now that I'm not stuck with just Shadow
I'm
Facts.
naming in Lotro. I'm going to name my steed Rohald now. My main steed is going to be
Yeah, when Bomber wakes up, he looks rather glum. He's lost the ponies. Gandalf laughs and says, "Never mind. Let's have breakfast. You were fools to bring them across the road. I wonder you got them so far. No one could have held them when all the noise started, but they'll be all right. My Rohald is looking after them." So they all set to, had a great breakfast, and after they slept, their night. Gandalf got up, went down the hill, and soon he came back leading his white horse, and all the ponies coming meekly behind. So yes, so even then, at the end of this chapter, we get Rohald saving the day for the ponies that were lost. So we'll leave it at that. Yeah, we like this chapter better. If you guys can get that somehow, like we don't have the publishing rights, we're not just going to print it here, but it's really, really, really well written. I really enjoyed this chapter more than the original.
Yep. I'm interested to see if the next, because there's a third chapter, right?
There is, but it's really brief. So we'll still do a whole chapter on it, but it is very brief, and we'll take a whole look at it and probably talk about what would have happened to the Hobbit had he rewritten it as a whole as well. All right, guys, this has been a little bit longer than we usually do, but I think it deserves it because very few authors go back and rewrite anything like this in any sort of way, because once it's released, right, it's out. Nobody wants to republish it. And so that we have these notes that Tolkien wrote was really important to see where his mind was in 1960 after the success of The Lord of the Rings already, and seeing where he would have taken The Hobbit had he had this opportunity to rewrite it. So I hope you enjoyed that. This is the part at which we must bid all you freeloaders adieu. And we're going to go do important things like talk to our members and answer their questions about gold. We're going to talk about how we're all going to try and set up or Michael's going to try and set up, because you have way more free time than I do, Michael. Joking. We're going to try and see if we can maybe, I don't know, figure out how to watch The Hobbit together. So if you want to join that, become a member at thewondering.com/member, thewondering.com/Patreon, or you can get the extended podcast. We'll talk about that, and see you on the other side.
Take care, freeloaders.